So for today's video, we're taking a look at the Shikishima, and I accidentally went into this game with a bit of a secondary build. This is a build that I have run on this ship in the past, and it was pretty good before the secondary rework back in patch 10.0, where you still had your full secondary accuracy as soon as you started shooting at whatever target you had selected with your secondaries. Now, though, those secondary builds aren't so good unless you're running them on maybe the German battleships or the premium American ones, the Ohio, Georgia, and Massachusetts, just because they have that built-in accuracy buff, where all these other ones, well, you'll see, they're really inaccurate to start with, and sometimes it's a little difficult to stay within secondary range to actually make use of them. The other issue with Shikishima secondaries are, well, their firing angles. We all know about the Yamato cheek and how juicy that is to Citadel, and to get all these secondaries firing, you kind of have to expose it a little bit, which is a little bit scary. Here's a Des Moines that I guess didn't expect to be spotted, and in a rare turn of events, we actually got 2 Citadels out of our front guns on a ship that's running a secondary build. So remember, we're missing around 7% accuracy when we're taking that full secondary build, which is one of the main reasons I don't recommend it. You do want that accuracy to hit things a little more consistency. Of course, there's always that RNG luck event where you actually do hit someone really hard, even without all the dispersion upgrades, but I'll take that as a start to this game, no problem. Unfortunately, the Holland is on the flank, so we're just going to have to run away. The other thing we're going to notice is our Lufthansa is YOLOing in, and well, our Lightning is also kind of just, they're a little too aggressive for these scenarios. So I am going to be running away, much like in that Ohio video. It's time to leave this flank. We're not going to get anything done here. Also, we have an AFK Alaska, which isn't going to be helping us too much to win this game. But Shikishima is such a strong ship that I think I can hold these guys back. And given the build that I'm running, I have a little bit of extra healing in it as well. And maybe the secondaries will come into play if somebody really decides to round this corner to try and kill myself or this Jotland. But it is time to run away at this point. Unfortunately, we lose a DD on the other flank as well. Pretty much the worst start you could think of, right? Even though the HP pools are relatively even, it's not looking so good, at least from the kill perspective. 2 DDs down, including one of our tier 10s, is not a good look. But for these secondary builds on ships that are not the German or premium American battleships, I'm not sure if they're good or not. That's kind of the thing that I've been trying to figure out since this patch 10.7, where they reintroduced some of the accuracy we lost, where, you know, you get this accuracy buff over time. I don't know if it's actually good on some of these ships. Part of me feels like that they do okay just because they got a bit of an accuracy or a range increase. Shikishima is not one of those, unfortunately, but things like Montana got a range increase going from 9.7 all the way up to 11 kilometers on its secondaries, which is basically Ohio range. So their secondaries' only difference is the accuracy. And, well, I do believe that the accuracy is so much more important than that extra range that I think most secondaries got worse. Outside of the German battleships, I think all secondaries are still worse than they were before the reworked commander skills. I think that ships like, well, it's pretty obvious that ships like Ohio and Massachusetts got a straight nerf. They did not see any range increases when that was the compensation initially. And in this last round, of course, they didn't get any extra bonuses compared to some of the other ships. So you just have worse accuracy for more of the time when you're playing those ships. It's only once you get that 45 seconds or so of shooting your secondaries out of an Ohio or Massachusetts that you have that original accuracy that you had with the ship, which is pretty sad. And that those ships also got nerfed, of course, with the submarine anti-submarine warfare. The proposed changes will give them some of that anti-submarine warfare, but of course it is extremely short range in comparison to something like a Montana or that kind of thing. So those ships got nerfed. The German battleships, I think, are the only ones that I could say, yeah, they got a buff. The way the accuracy works with them, it takes maybe 20 seconds and the accuracy feels about the same as it was before all of these changes to secondaries. And then of course you have that extra bonus as it stacks up, which is pretty cool, you know, having close to Ohio accuracy on the German battleships is pretty neat, especially when you can pen 32 millimeters. Although the German battleships, of course, have their other weaknesses, like their gigantic superstructures. So I think that overall, the secondaries are just worse. Maybe that is down to the way the meta has changed as well, where not often do you see someone pushing in their in their egg gear straight up the middle of the map. I guess this is a bit of an odd situation where our team is basically controlling the 9-10 line, and that's about it. But we'll take that and enjoy a few secondary hits at least. And I think going forward on the Shikishima, I'll just be running a normal build where you go for accuracy, some concealment, fire prevention, and the extra healing. I think it's boring, it's bland, but it is really difficult to push in these days, and I think that's going to lead to the most consistent results. I unfortunately would love to run these more secondary focused builds and have really amazing fun games, but it's just too frustrating when you have those, I don't know, maybe 60% of the time, 70% of the time where you just feel useless and that your build can't work at all. That just gets annoying and it makes me play the game less. So I'll be going back to a more traditional build, I think. Maybe keep a few of the secondary upgrades because they only do cost 7 points. And that is a good buff. That is a nice change where you can get the full secondary build out of the captain for just 7 points. But I think there's bigger issues with these secondary builds that go past just their damage output. I think a lot of the times you die very quickly when you push into these secondary ranges. So maybe some survivability buffs would be interesting to look at if you wanted to really push these secondary builds, but I don't think that's what people are looking for. The damage output, not amazing. It's not even the most satisfying type of damage to get, right? If I had to pick the more satisfying types of damage to get, or maybe the ones to when you're on the receiving end of some of these shots, I would far rather eat a ton of damage when I'm flat broadside making a mistake than to just take this damage over time from secondaries. It's something that I've been thinking about a little bit, what type of damage output and receiving is more interesting in this game. And to me, it comes down to main guns. I think it's much more interesting when the damage you're taking is directly controlled by the player, and that damage is coming from a source that is also vulnerable in itself, right? So a surface ship that has to put itself in some danger to get into positions where they're actually shooting the enemy and dealing that damage. I guess that's not going to happen, though, because I think y'all know where I'm hinting at with putting yourself at risk. CVs definitely don't fall into that category. So I think that overall, I wish secondaries were better because they're a fun thing to play around with, but I do understand the idea that maybe we don't want to go that direction with the damage output or incoming damage. It can get a little frustrating. I guess I'd just like to see a little bit of changes to the main guns then to make them feel a little more satisfying, and that when I do aim well and position well, that I feel like it's worth it, the risk that I'm taking a lot of the time. And unfortunately, that's not always the case. However, this game, things did work out pretty well. We're already up to 200,000 damage in a little over 10 minutes of gameplay, which I would say is a pretty solid game. I'm surprised how close this game actually is at this point. And we have a real chance of winning this, although you got to remember AFK Alaska. So it's not actually as close as we might think. But if I can take a 1v1 or a 1v2, 2v2 here with this Soyuz and Talon, we might actually be able to pull out a win. That's really what I was going for here, is I wanted to prevent, again, we looked at this map already with that Ohio game, but people really want to get control of one flank and then push through to the middle cap. That is really how this match and this map works. So I wanted to get into a position where this Worcester, this DD, couldn't really push out of the C cap safely without potentially having to deal with me. I am turning my front guns to deal with this Soyuz, but you'll notice that my goal is to actually keep my rear turret facing towards that entrance at C. That's something that you can do just by manipulating where your camera is looking. The turrets are so slow that you can kind of sort of keep it looking that direction. Unfortunately, we're not going to get any value out of that as the Wooster plays this really smart and decides to stay in cover and never come out against me. But we're going to get more secondary hits. I think that is the biggest issue, though, is the secondaries don't really feel like they're doing all that much. Of course, it is a Soyuz. I understand that, where that thing has some pretty incredible armor, but even the fire chance, even though we just got one, didn't really seem to be helping all that much. Again, Russian battleship type of thing. And then because I'm doing these secondaries that aren't actually helping me that much, you notice they're not firing due to their poor firing arcs, because I need to angle. I can't just give away free citadels here. They're not helping me at all. It's just a waste of points, is how it feels a lot of the time. We do get, one salvo off into the Soyuz's nose and almost kill him. I thought for sure he was going to die to the fire or the CV was going to hit him, but unfortunately that's not the case. And because we're running a secondary build, of course, our dispersion is nowhere near as good as it usually is. And, well, this guy just survives and survives and survives. Unfortunately, that's going to be our game. But 240k is not bad out of an accidental secondary build. But I don't think I really recommend running these secondary builds anymore. Just the way the meta has evolved in this case. So if you're wondering what I was actually running in that match, this is it. Kind of the secondary build that I've come to on the German battleships and those premium American ones. But I actually don't really like this build anymore on the Shikishima or the Montana or any of the other more standard, I guess, battleships in the game. I've moved away from this build. I'm going to have to redistribute once I get enough Elite Commander XP. And probably go over to something a little bit more normal. And you can see here, secondary battery mod. I'm definitely going to be taking aiming systems. And maybe even concealment again is probably the way to go. I don't really think that this consumables mod is really working out for me. It's something I like to test, and you'll see that as we go through maybe some of these videos in the future, and as you look back at some of my older videos, that I do like to mess around with builds. So don't take every build in every one of these videos as this is the ultimate best optimal build, right? I'm always trying things, trying to mess around and get things working a little bit better for myself. The Kurfurst is a great example of that. You can see the build we have right here already. Doesn't have all secondaries. We're running aiming systems a little bit to try and get those main guns back. But I think the only ships you really should be running secondaries on if you want to have a reasonable shot at doing well in the game, on average, you know, you're going to have those one-offs where they actually function, but I think the German battleships and the premium American ones that actually have the secondary buff are really the only ones that you can run secondaries on comfortably. And even then, you'll notice that the GK, I'm not actually running that on anymore. Something like the Shikishima, I'm probably going to switch over to a more normal commander where we're taking some of the better skills for battleships, like Concealment Expert here, instead of the manual secondaries, and instead of these long-range battery shells, secondary battery, I might switch over to Adrenaline Rush, or maybe even switch over to some AA. If planes are really bugging you, going with both AA upgrades can help a little bit if you get lucky with the way the flak puffs. Of course, Shikishima, just to talk a little bit about its AA, you do get 10 explosions, right? So if you get lucky on the way they pop, you can nuke some planes. But again, it's RNG and not very likely to happen. So that is the Shikishima and where I'm at on secondary builds outside of those two exceptions, where I don't think they're really that good anymore. And I personally probably won't be running them just due to how frustrating they are most of the time. So thank you very much for watching, and I hope you have a great day.